Okay. Hi, I'm Colin, and I'll be explaining the wages disadvantage that I put together for y'all. So like all disadvantages, this DA or off-case position has four parts. The uniqueness, which is the reason the problem isn't occurring now. The link, which is the reason why the plan causes that problem. The internal link, which is what other things that problem will affect. And the impact, which is the final big thing that will be caused by the problem the AF creates. In this case, the problem we will be arguing that the AF creates is a decline in wages for workers in the United States. So I'll start with a basic overview of the generic arguments in each of these components, and then I'll explain some little tricks and good answers this DA file has. So much of the link story will be centered around theories of supply and demand. So I'm going to explain those theories right now. They're just like economic principles. If you think you have a pretty good idea of how these economic systems function, though, feel free to consult the timetable that I'm going to post in the Slack channel, like it will be a message alongside this video, so that it will tell you how to skip past this part and when the rest of the video will resume. But if you are shaky on concepts of supply and demand, you should watch this because it will solidify your understandings of just these economic functions, which are really crucial to understanding how the DA works. Okay, so the concept of supply and demand as it relates to wages is essentially this. First is the demand. So businesses and corporations will always need a certain number of employees, and they will pay whatever is required to attract that number of employees so that they can keep the trains running on time within their business. So, for example, let's say that to make operations run smoothly, the company Apple needs 10 employees. So Apple plans on opening a single store, and they need 3 people to manufacture products, 2 people to design products, 3 people to run the store, and 1 person to answer calls that come to the store. In order to operate their business and to keep their doors open and make any money at all, Apple needs these 10 employees and will pay whatever high wages are required to get those employees. Next is the supply. The number of people who can work in the marketplace will vary. If there are a few people in the marketplace able to work, all the companies that all need their employees will have to fight over the available laborers to try and take some employees away from other businesses. The way these companies fight is by increasing wages or salaries to attract employees to their corporation instead of to somebody else's. So, to make this less abstract, let's go back to our Apple example. Recall that Apple needs 10 employees to run its business. Luckily for Apple, there are 10 people in Apple's economic market or region that are able to work. Apple pays them all $5 an hour, and they all come to work for Apple because they have nothing else to do anyway, and they might as well make some money. One day, Samsung comes along and opens up their store right next to Apple. Samsung also needs 10 people to make its company profitable and to keep the doors open. However, Samsung sees that all of the 10 people it needs are already employed at Apple, so to take those employees away from Apple, Samsung offers to pay the employees $10 an hour, which is twice as much as Apple, if they jump ship and come work for Samsung instead. So all of the employees see the opportunity to make a higher wage, so they take off their Apple uniforms, they go over to Samsung, and they make more money. Apple sees this and all of a sudden doesn't have any more employees, and it really needs those employees if it's going to make any profit. So it increases its wages to $15 an hour, and all the employees come back to work for Apple, and Samsung is left with none. So on and so forth. Next, Samsung offers 20, then Apple does 25, and apparently this goes in increments of 5, and they keep fighting over the number of available employees, which is limited. So contrastingly, there can be a labor oversupply, which results in decreased wages. So if at the time Apple was offering $15 an hour to its employees, 90 new people who wanted to work moved into the area in which Apple was operating, Apple would have 100 people from which it could choose its 10 employees, instead of just having the exact number that it needed. And Samsung would have the same opportunity. So let's just say that these 90 people walk into Apple and Samsung for job interviews, and they say to an Apple hiring manager, "I would like to work at this company and earn $15 an hour." For the purposes of this example, we're just going to stick with Apple. The Apple hiring manager says, the person before you said that they would work for $7 an hour, so either you go lower than that, or we aren't interested in hiring you. The prospective employee responds by offering to take the wage of $6. Then the next person comes in, and they take a wage of $4 to take the job away from that previous person, and so on and so forth. Because all of these people need employment, and because Apple can pick and choose who among them it employs, Apple has a ton of bargaining power and control over the wages that it doles out. Before, when there were only 10 employees, the employees could name their price, and Apple had to pay up because it had no alternative but to close down and not make any money. But now, Apple can make all the prospective employees compete with each other over the few spots that Apple is offering, which drives down everyone's wages and means that less money goes into their pockets for consumer spending. which I'll explain what that is in a moment. So now that we understand those basic theories of supply and demand, I'll go on to explaining the uniqueness. So the idea is that currently there are just about enough people willing to work in the US marketplace to fulfill all the jobs that companies need. So this means the labor market is tight. Because of this, the companies have to fight with each other a little bit, but not too much, to get the employees that they need, and that produces good wages which go into the pockets of American consumers. So using these wages, U.S. consumers go out and spend their wages on goods, services, etc., which stimulates the economy. This is called consumer spending. So literally, the consumer, which is like everybody in their day-to-day capacity, like buying goods at Walgreens or Starbucks or wherever else, and purchasing goods and services. When you buy your coffee at Starbucks, you're helping the Starbucks corporation, and that on a large scale is what props up the economy. So next is the link. The plan admits tons more workers into the economy, which means there is a tremendous increase in competition amongst prospective employees for the positions that businesses are offering. So because of the plan, the size of each, what's called the skill group in the economy, so for example, tech workers or auto mechanics, increases so much that employees can pick and choose from the available employees, whichever ones will accept the lowest wages. So they'll be like, we have 100 auto mechanics applying, we only need 10, we'll just take the people who are willing to take the lowest wage. So everybody who offers to just be paid a wage of $1 an hour, we'll take them. So we argue that each worker will be forced, obviously that's like a vacuum example and wages would never go that low, but we'll argue that in the real world, there will be such an oversupply of labor because of all of the people that the AF admits that workers will be forced to accept at least 3% less of a wage than they made before just to get a job because the employer has so many alternatives and so many people to choose from. So if you were offered an $80,000 annual salary before, because of all the competition amongst you and all the other people the company can hire, your offer will be decreased to a maximum of $77,600, which means you lose at least $2,400 each year, which could really impact spending habits for most people. However, the Borjas author argues you could lose as much as 10%, meaning you would have a $72,000 offer instead and lose $8,000 a year, which is very, very significant for most people. Okay, next is the internal link. We argue that consumer spending, or the ability of people to deplete their wages on goods, or not entirely deplete, but deplete some of their wages on goods and services, is key to stimulate the economy. When people use their wages to buy things, that helps businesses make money, and sometimes the goods that person buys help them make money as well. So for example, if you buy a new computer and that computer is really fast, maybe that helps you run your business, and then the fact that you purchased that good not only helps the computer manufacturer, but you're using it to be more productive, which stimulates the economy in whatever work you're doing as well. So this process of buying things is the engine of the economy, as I mentioned. If consumers don't have high enough wages to afford things, they won't buy anything, and then companies will go bankrupt because no one will purchase the company's product. This bankrupting of companies and lack of consumer spending will wreck the financial market and it will cause widespread economic decline. So finally is the impact. When the economy declines, everyone in the US will be really unhappy. They will blame the politicians in office for not doing anything about the financial situation and for allowing these immigrants to enter the US, which they allege ended up causing competition and decreasing everyone's wages. So they will think that Trump, firstly, did not have the foresight to predict this issue, and secondly, that he is not responding to it well, which is why everyone is not financially well off. So this is really bad for Trump and will make him look unpopular. So he will be desperate to get everyone's mind off of the economic scenario and make everyone focus on something else that won't make him unpopular. So, as you know, in the Great Depression, a lot of people were really upset with Hoover, who was the president at the time, for not doing enough to combat the economic crisis. So an economic crisis gets blamed on the president. People are like, I'm making a lower wage. That's because these dumb politicians that I elected aren't doing enough to increase my wage or to protect the salary that I was making before. So that's really unpopular for Trump, and that will endanger his chance of getting elected in the future, because now all the people that are unhappy about the decrease in their wage, which they blame on him, are not going to want to vote for him in the next election cycle. So we argue that he will launch a nuclear bomb and start a nuclear conflict with other countries to divert everyone's attention towards those wars that he's starting instead of on the economy. And this nuclear war will cause extinction, as most nuclear wars would. So, okay. Yeah, that's the whole story of the Dissad. I kind of changed my mind about doing an extensive list of tricks, but I will touch on the epistemological claims, which I think we have some neat answers to, and I'll let y'all know about some pieces of evidence that you can consult if you want like more like spicy answers. So, okay. So I have like a brief thing in the file that you will ultimately receive about explaining like what does the word epistemological mean, and this is like was difficult for me to boil down. But basically, epistemology is how we know what we know. So an epistemological approach is basically a way of looking at the world, and also a way of like seeking out information to make decisions. So the affirmative could argue that the negatives approach of talking about and investigating how immigrants would hurt the U.S. economy is a bad way of thinking because it leads to nationalist narratives of like, oh, keep out the racial minorities to help existing U.S. residents, which justifies a lot of xenophobic and racist attitudes and policies. So you have responses to this claim beneath the AT, or answer to wages equal bad epistemology label, and I think that these are like pretty good. So first, you have this like Borjas card, which says, reject evidence that minimizes the link. It's the result of academic censorship and extreme biases towards portraying immigration as an unmitigated good, and it discredits the input of other liberal social science. So what this means is that, first of all, like what you should say in the debate is that all of the impacts of the wages disadvantage are a reason why you should throw out this like ridiculousness that the affirmative is saying about epistemology. So if we adhered to what the affirmative was saying and we never thought about what the economic consequences of immigration would be, that might be like all well and good for like our epistemological approach, but ultimately it would cause extinction because nobody would foresee this diversionary war, which you're saying that the immigration will result in. So like the diversionary war and like nuclear extinction that will happen as a result of the plan would be completely ignored if you listen to the affirmative's epistemology, and that's like a reason why you should disregard what they're saying about how we shouldn't be thinking about immigrants' economic impact, because you'll say, yes, we should. That's the only way we prevent nuclear war. So that's interesting. Secondly, in this Borjas 16 card, okay, so if you believe, as you should, that we should not endorse an epistemology which leads to like xenophobic exclusion and thinking about people in other countries as like enemies of the good within the United States, then you would want to like maintain systems of social science and investigation of like societal trends and societal attitudes which are used to combat xenophobia. So yeah. However, if we make like left-leaning institutions and etc., like all the other institutions that would investigate those claims of xenophobia and would try and prevent that kind of racism, if we make them really not credible, nobody's going to listen to them when they say like, oh, like separate but equal schooling isn't really equal. It's like actually causing like rampant racial inequalities, and we need to address that. They're going to be like, oh yeah, but like you're just hogwash. Like there are all these other issues that you like made up these left-leaning stances on, and it didn't prove true. So this is probably another example of that. And in fact, the schools probably are separate but equal. So that's just like a random example. But basically, okay, hold on. I'm trying to think of how to summarize this. So, okay. Borjas is arguing that the really clear economic evidence is that when more immigrants come in, it increases the competition amongst employees, which drives down wages. If we turn like left-leaning institutions into these like puppets to talk about how no, that's not true, no, that's bad epistemology, no, we shouldn't be thinking about the economic impact of immigrants, and we make them like deny that economic reality, moderates and right-leaning people in the country will be like, wow, that's like really not credible. So I'm trying, like, okay, so if the Brookings Institution, which is a left-leaning institution, says immigrants like don't hurt the economy, they help the economy, and then like everyone comes to find out that that's not true, when the Brookings Institution is then talking about like aspects of racial inequality, they're going to be like, oh, it's also not true. Like it's the same like liberal spin coming from the Brookings Institution, and so we're just going to like toss that out. So yeah, we would argue that it's important to acknowledge the simple economic truth, in the case of this disadvantage, that immigrants coming to the U.S. decreases wages in order to preserve the credibility of those institutions and combat other instances of xenophobia and racism, and that's what this Borjas 16 card says. Okay, So I know that was complicated. The other thing is not as complicated. Your Ruark 14 card underneath these epistemology answers says that this idea that we shouldn't focus on the economic impact of immigrants is based on MNC think tanking. It's ideological, not evidence driven. So MNC stands for multinational corporation. So just think like big companies. I guess Starbucks is a multinational corporation. So I don't know why I keep using Starbucks, but basically, I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so it's really good for multinational corporations if people come to the United States en masse. Because if you believe the story that the Dissad weaves of how more employees means more competition and means that the employer has to pay less, then like if you're Starbucks, you're all for like tons of people coming to the US because it means that you can pay each of them less, there will be more competition amongst employees, and you don't have to spend as much money on your employees' wages. Like, so you'll save some money as the Starbucks Corporation, which is like good for all the people that work in Starbucks corporate. So, because of that, and I don't mean to slander Starbucks. This is just an example. I don't know that Starbucks actually does this. But in theory, Starbucks could lobby for like open borders, and just like getting rid of the border to the United States, or they could lobby for less extreme immigration policies that would just increase the number of people coming to the United States. And they would do all that in pursuit of just getting as many immigrants in here being the US, as possible so that they can pay everybody less because they'll have more workers to choose from. So the argument is that in addition to lobbying like Congress and stuff, Starbucks would like pay research institutions to create like papers and academia that all says that like immigrants coming to the economy would be good, and that like we shouldn't think about the economic impact of those immigrants, just do it. And that kind of like Starbucks driven research or like multinational corporation driven research is what the AF is saying. So Starbucks is like, oh, we need more immigrants. That will help us like pay everybody less, which will like help us like the greedy like corporate fat cats sitting at the top of the Starbucks corporation. And in order to accomplish that, we need to like get everybody to believe that bringing more immigrants in is a good idea. So to do that, like we're gonna like publish all these studies talking about how like it's violent to think about the consequences of immigration economically for like the citizens that are already here, and we're gonna like publish all this information about how like immigration actually like helps the economy. And then the AF is like, which is trying to combat your wages Dissad claims, finds all this information that Starbucks put out and like tosses it back at you and is like, see, you're wrong. Also, it was violent of you to bring these ideas into the debate. And you're like, okay, first of all, that's not true, and that is like ideologically driven. That's not evidence driven. Those like research things that you're citing were not objective. They were done with the intent of like propping up Starbucks at the expense of everybody else. And second of all, even though like you think that you're like being really like good and like helping all the citizens of the world, what you're really doing is like giving a voice to Starbucks narratives, which are like corporation narratives, which just aim to like exploit more immigrants as a weapon to hurt the wages of their employees and prop up their own like profit making. So yeah, that's like bad epistemology as well, and is like perhaps worse, according to this Dissad. So, yeah, those are like, that is the most complicated claim that the affirmative can make against this disadvantage. Everything else is just going to be like, immigrants help the economy, or like, we don't let that many people in, or like other things like that that are really like intuitive and easy for you to understand. And there are things like in the file that can help you respond to those claims. That epistemology stuff is definitely the most complex, but I think that those are some pretty good answers to it, and you can investigate the cards in the file that talk about those things if you're still a little bit confused, which is totally understandable because that is a difficult thing to be introduced to just like all of a sudden. Okay. Other things I would recommend reading. Link magnifiers just talk about how, that's a section in the file that just talks about how not only does the AF admit more immigrants, but then those immigrants will bring their families over in what's called subsequent family-based migration. That's probably the term that you should use, but it's also referred to as chain migration, which you might have heard. And that will result in more of a decrease in wages because now you have more people from all these different skill groups coming to the US and competing with like native or pre-existing workers. I would read those link magnifiers. They help you in this story that just had. Yeah, everything else is pretty intuitive. The internal link evidence, let me make sure. Yeah. The Rame 17 card, once you get the file, if you're curious about the internal link and the way that wages are crucial to the economy, would also be good to read. But that's it. Yeah, okay. I hope that helps. Slack me a direct message, or I guess you can email me at colin.m.debate@gmail.com if you have any more questions. Okay, thank you. Or, I guess I shouldn't say. Okay, bye.